I'm going to put the date on here, so in case today is January the 7th, 1983. The purpose of the interview is to interview Ms. Pearl George, a long-time activist in human rights and civil rights in the Baton Rouge area, and also represent a council person for the Ward
1, District 3.
Ward 1, District 3.
Yeah.
So, Mr. George, Ms. George. You're originally from Baton Rouge, correct?
Yeah, I was born and lived here in Baton Rouge. I grew up in a poor area. I grew up in a house without a father. I grew up in a house it was 4 of us. My mother had 4 children by herself. I think my father walked off and left my mother when I was 9 years old. And as you know, that was a bad experience, and especially during the time when I was born, it was right after the Depression. And it was hard for women, and especially black women, to find, is that correct? To find any type of employment. But I must say, my family was a religious type family style, and my mother, she believed it real deeply in God. And I know that's what brought us through, because again, just like I said, it was hard for a black woman with 4 kids, and at that time, black men was not forced to pay non-support like they are today. And I can remember my being the second to the oldest, it was always a responsibility of the 2 oldest kids to take care of the smaller ones, and it was 2 under me. And my other sister was in our high school. And you know, black kids have really had it hard, and you're talking about busing, and I can remember the time when buses used to pass us going to a white school riding white kids. But the way it was in those days for us, my sister, who was the oldest, would go to school in the morning from 7 to 12, and I would go to school from 12 to 5. And of course, like I said, you know, we had to take care of the smaller children. And as we grew up and grew older, again, my mama was a hard-working person. And she always told us to go to school, get a degree, get an education, because I don't want you to do the things that I'm doing, which was working from sun up to sundown. Because she would leave in the mornings, and we didn't see her in the morning till late in the afternoons, because she had 2 jobs in order to support us. And the most unique thing that I really didn't know at that time, those were some hard times. But I never realized there was any such thing as welfare or commodities or something that poor people could get, because we was always taught to not to let somebody give you something, go out and get it. You know, plenty of times I used to hear my mother say, the Lord's not going to put any more mouths here than he can feed. But if you open your mouth there and wait for the Lord, he's not going to do it. He's not going to put it in there by himself. You have to do something to help yourself. So she always instilled this in us, you got to go out and get more than I got, because times is hard, and I don't want you all to experience the things that I'm experiencing. So that grew up in me. And as life goes on, and as I got older, got married and had a daughter, my husband got killed in the Korea War. And what actually got me concerned about human rights, and especially black people rights, was, let me go back a little further. On Saturday afternoons, when my mother would have a little extra change, there was only 2 restaurants in Baton Rouge that black people could eat at. It was Bernard's Chicken Loaf House, and of course, Delpit's Chicken Shack. And she would carry us to the Chicken Shack on Saturdays afternoon. And I used to pass by, and at that time there wasn't any such thing as parks for black people. And I would pass by the city park, and I would ask my mother why we could not go to that park. And she says, well, at that time the word was colored. She says, colored people aren't allowed there, it's just white only. And I would tell her, I said, well, Mama, I said, don't you pay tax? She said, yes, we do. She said, but colored people still cannot go there. And we would pass there just about every Saturday, because on Saturdays when she would take us to Chicken Shack. At that time, the only places that black folks could go was the church shows or a place like Chicken Shack. So I said, and I passed there one Saturday, and I said, Mama, I said, one day I am going, because it wasn't a such thing that black people had a swimming pool to swim in, recreation facilities. It was no such thing as recreation facilities in the late 50s and early 60s for blacks. So I told my mother, I said, one day I'm going to swim in that pool. And my mama says, maybe not you, but your children. Maybe your children or somebody might swim in that pool. I said, Mama, I'm going to the city park one day. I said, I'm going to swim in that pool. And that something had growed in me. And when my daughter got up, she was about 5 or 6 years old. And at this time, like I said, I lost my husband during the Korean War. And she wanted to go swimming. And the only pool at that time was Brooks Park and Capitol. And of course, as you know, Capitol Park, Recreation Park over here, everybody's swimming in the same pool. I don't care what age bracket you was. But since then, of course, you know, I've gotten another one over there. And when I looked and thought in my mind, I carried over there, it was so crowded, she couldn't really get in there. And at that time, that's when demonstrations and the civil rights movement was up on the uprise. And I went to a church, a Green Chapters Methodist Church. Reverend Jokes was the pastor of that church.
Excuse me, is that storage?
Yeah.
That's where the compressors come from?
Yeah. And at that time, Reverend Jokes was very active in civil rights. So I went to him, and he said, well, Miss George, he said, we're having a meeting here tonight with the NAACP. And if you have some complaints, why don't you come over and let's talk about it? And I did. And at that meeting that night, I decided the next morning that I would carry my daughter to the city park to swim. We had that freedom meeting that night. Somebody, don't know who, informed the police department that we would be at the city park to swim that day. They gave them the time. I can't remember the exact time. And when we got to the city park, there were sheriff department, city police, state troopers, and I guess every law enforcement agency that you can name. It was about 50 of us. They had paddy wagons there. They had sheriff's office there with rifles. And actually, you would think that we were some type of animals, because people, I don't think you would, at that time we was nonviolent, and anytime you said that a demonstration was being held, people right away knew that it wasn't any violence. They was there with their guns and billy clubs waiting to receive us and ask us where we were going as we walked into the city park, and I told them that we was going to swim. And what really hurted me so bad, I said, here's my husband, who, my daughter's father, who had gone to war. Wasn't his choice to go. He was drafted. He didn't want to go. To fight for a country, so-called country for blacks, and we're talking about equal and justice for all, that he given his life for. Career, the Japanese, all these people you passed out, I see him playing golf, I see him going to the swimming pool, I see him going to the use of the parks. And yet...
You go any further. I'd like to ask you this question. You mentioned Freedom Night, NAACP, and I think you said Reverend Jones?
Jones. Arthur Jones led the first demonstration along with me in East Baton Rouge Parish. Okay. At that time, you couldn't get black ministers. I don't know if they was afraid at that time or they just wasn't concerned. Reverend Arthur Jones was the first minister, Methodist, J-E-O-K.
J-E-O-K.
Mm-hmm.
Now, was this before the Montgomery boycott? Dr. Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, or was this about the same time?
It was during the same time.
Same time?
During the same time.
And you also mentioned the NAACP, that you had worked with them. Who was the president? Do you remember who was the president at that time, or who were the active members and some of the other people who were active in Freedom Night?
Okay, we had at that time Joe Delpit, who was a councilman. We had Attorney Johnny Jones, who was the attorney in Murphyville, who really was for CORE, but at that time, black folks was more united together. And when one civil rights group had a rally or freedom march or rally, everybody participated in it.
The early 60s.
That's right. Attorney Jones then was the attorney for the NAACP. Reverend Jones was president then of NAACP. Reverend Walker, who was a Methodist preacher over at Bethel AME Methodist Church, was the secretary and treasurer. They was the ones who actually started the movement in East Baton Rouge Parish. Reverend Jones was the first one to try and integrate, along with my daughter, the local elementary schools and senior high schools at that time. You know, we was turning away from Fairfield School that was white at that time. With he and I and my daughter, we was turning away from Fairfair, all the white elementary schools at that time. And of course, we was also turning around from Baton Rouge High.
And did Freedom Nights and so forth, it was basically predominantly black. I know in some organizations there, at that time, they had whites who were participating in the civil rights movement. But in Baton Rouge, in the integrating of the swimming pools and the integrating of the schools and some other restaurants and so forth, in your opinion, would you say that it was primarily the movement of the black people and other black people that you have mentioned? Because, in other interviews we have gathered that, some white, in other things, whites did participate in.
Whites was participating in CORE. Whites was participating in some parts of the different states in NAACP, but no whites participated in the NAACP of Baton Rouge.
Okay.
It was totally black. And you had some, and I feel at that time you might have had some sincere white people, but at that time I think white folks was looking for an experience. They really wanted to see what it was, and most of them, as you know, went back and made money off the struggle that black folks actually went through, and we're still struggling to write books. You understand? See, white folks is funny. They'll let you believe that they'll for you until they get what they want from you, and when they get what they want from you, they are gone on. So really and truly, again, they had some white people in that time in CORE, but not in the NAACP, not local, not here in East Baton Rouge Parish. And let me see where I left off at.
Okay, you were at the night going to the schools and the
swimming
you were
pool.
going to the swimming pool, and you were thinking at that time that your husband was killed.
Right, here's a man who have sacrificed his life for his so-called country. And here his daughter couldn't go to a swimming pool that they said it was for white only. And that done something to me. And as you know, I was arrested, one of the times that I was arrested at that sit-in swimming pool. And of course at that time, they said that I had cut the chief of police, who was white of course. They charged me with aggravated battery.
So you cut him?
They said I cut him. I got charged and convicted of aggravated battery.
Who was the chief at that time?
Chief Wingate White. And of course, I did, 6 months down. Yes, I did at the time it was East Baton Rouge Parish Jail. I did 6 months down there. That led on to my being concerned about many other things. Then I got involved in the marches and the demonstrations from Southern University with Reverend Cox, Alton B. Cox, who was a student up at Southern University at that time. Baton Rouge, and I think Reverend Cox at that time was a member of CORE. I think he was the president here of CORE. And as I said, CORE wasn't too active in East Baton Rouge Parish. As you know, CORE was very active in Plaquemine. They was working real hard in Plaquemine, Port Allen, and Bugaloos at that time. First time that I have ever saw how injustice that the court system could be is when they had Reverend Cox on trial. And as you know, during those days,
what was he on trial for, and by what time?
That should have been in 1968. Should have. It might not be quite right on the dates, but that was one of the first demonstrations that he led from Southern University. And of course, at that time, he was accused of inciting a riot and obstructing justice. And at that time, they would put charges on you, really, that you never heard of. I don't think they have too, but they would go to a booth and find something and charge you with something in order to put a high bond on you. Of course, you know that's when they shot tear gas on us down there, along with Brian Clement, who was sheriff at that time, and Jack Crystal, who was mayor. Ordered the police department to disperse the crowd and turn loose dogs and tear gas on us down there at the courthouse. So, of course, they brought Reverend Cox to trial. And at that time, it wasn't popular for black people to go to the courts unless you were there for some crime or something. You know, you had to have some type of business to go down there, because at that time, black folks was afraid of white police officers in the courthouse, but I never was. He was on trial. And you had students from Southern University and everywhere else, and people was going, because this is the first time that something like this had happened in Baton Rouge.
Before you talk about the trial, what was why were the marchers at Southern University?
The marchers left from Southern University at that time. You know, they had up all the signs, says white water fountain here, white bathrooms here, white lunch counters here, and of course, you know, that's when the lunch counter integration first started, through Reverend Cox and myself and some of the students most of the students at that time from Southern University. And the most unique thing, we was getting together and had different rallies and things up on Southern University campus, and we really thought that the administrations were with us, the students at that time.
One of the Clarks was president?
Dr. Felton G. Clark, right. We thought he really was with us and behind us at that time. But when we led that demonstration, because he left and went to Washington, and they summoned him to come back to Southern University, and at that time, everybody who was involved in the march was expelled from Southern University. That's why you found that Reverend Cox, after he was exonerated, he went on to Virginia to finish his degree. YWCA went to Washington, to Harvard to finish his, and all the other persons who left the South because of the bad experience that they have had at that time. But I chose to stay here and fight.
No one's the principal persons that was involved there in this particular march. None of them they're no longer here.
Not here in Baton Rouge. Like I say, they all left after then, and so I chose to stay. But however, back to the sit-in in the courtroom, when one side was for white and the other side was for black. And that day the courtroom was jam-packed when I walked in. My first time being in the court system myself and in the courthouse. And at that time, again, they had sheriff's deputies standing in the hall breast to breast, rifles, dogs standing by. I mean, you know, it was pathetic. You thought you were walking into, they were coming, people who was coming there was, again, some kind of wild animals, and they are going to attack us, and we better be ready.
So this was after the swimming pool?
This was before.
This was before the swimming pool?
This was before.
So you hadn't been arrested for aggravated battery?
Before this? No.
Okay.
The following summer I was.
Okay.
All right. I guess I should have started from there.
No, it's not. It's straight now.
Okay. But anyway, so when I walked in the courtroom, the white side was, they had about 3 or 4 white people sitting over there, so I saw all blacks standing around the room, all in the hall, sitting all on the heater, and this side that I found out later that it was reserved for whites. We're talking about justice. We're talking about in the courtroom. We're talking about Judge LeBlanc, who at that time who has passed on. So when I sit on the front row, the bailiff came over and told me, said, "I'm sorry, but you cannot sit here." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because this side is for white." I said, "I thought the courtroom was for justice." He said, "You cannot sit here. If you sit here, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." I told him I was not going to leave. It was Laura Harris and Willie Lee Harris. There was 3 mothers there. They walked in with me. We sit on the white side. The judge, he went up and told the judge that I refused to move. The judge told me to approach the bench. When I approached the bench, he asked me my name, my age, and where I was from. I gave him that information. The 3 of us, he called us up. He said, "I'm going to ask you all to leave the courtroom, Judge LeBlanc. If you don't leave the courtroom, I will have to place you all under arrest for contempt of court." We said we were going to leave. And when I walked to go out that door, something struck me. And during the civil rights movement when we first started, the first thing we used to do before we would go out, really, you know,
but you feel at that point you thought you left something behind you?
I did. I was thinking about the things that I had been deprived of for being black. And I thought about my child, who I knew was going to be deprived. And I remembered that song, that I ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. And I went back, and I sit on that side again. The bailiff came back to me again, and this is very touching, because I feel if some of the young people would know what we really went through within those days, in order for them to have the better things of life, I think they most certainly would appreciate it and wouldn't do some of the things that they are doing today. Because it really hurts me. And I went back, the 3 of us went back and we sit down. The bailiff came back again. He said, "I'm going to have to ask you all to leave again." I told him I wasn't leaving. Judge LeBlanc called me back up again. He says, it seems as if though you are disrupting, and at this time blacks were standing up on their feet because this is the first time that a black woman had ever talked up to a black judge of the white system at that time. This was something unusual, because if a black man tried to speak up for himself, of course, you know, they would beat him, they would humiliate him, you know, it was just pathetic. And I says, well, and I says, well, if I'm going to die, let me die for something that black folks would enjoy some of the things that I couldn't enjoy. I stood there and I told him that if he would let me go back again, I sat on the side that was all white. I said, "Judge LeBlanc, you talking about justice in a courtroom, and you telling me just because my skin is black that I have a certain side to sit on?" I said, "There is no vacant seats to sit over there." He said, "Stand up against the wall like the rest of them." I told him, not on This Is Your Life. He says, you telling me that if I let you go, that you wouldn't leave the courtroom. I said, I'm telling you, if you let me go, I'll sit on the white side. At that time, all the deputies, again, were standing up in the courtroom with their rifles, hands on their guns. Judge LeBlanc told them to place me on the arrest. They did, the three of us. He told them to place us. They asked them would they leave too. They told them no, that they believed in the same thing that I believed in, and we wasn't leaving. They placed us under arrest, and they carried us to jail. It should have been about the 31st of November. Because I can remember, we got out a day before Christmas Eve.
63?
That's right. Attorney Jones, who was the attorney then for the NAACP, when we was arrested, we were charged with contempt and to incite a riot. You know, when you get a contempt charge, there's no bond on you. Again, like I said, the white folks would put these types of charges on you so you can stay in jail, so they could try to discourage you from participating again. But the more that they would try to make it harder, discourage me, the more determination I had. I said, hey, it's got to be something good out here anytime a white man trying to discourage me from getting it. We stayed in jail at the time. Attorney Jones went to Court of Appeal. Of course, they turned it down. He went to the United States Supreme Court, and as I can appreciate it, it's the first time that a case have reached and their rule on a case within 21 days at the United States Supreme Court. The United Supreme Court had us freed, I think it was 2 days before Christmas, and we got out. And again, that made me more determined to fight for equal justice and equality for black people. First time that I was arrested downtown in either one of the coffee shops, you know, we was fighting to get black police officers on. And at that time, black police officers wasn't allowed to arrest white folks. Nor would black police officers was allowed to use the cafeteria down in the city court or in the district court. And if you talk to some of the older police officers, you will find out that the black police officers could not use either one of the coffee shops until I went in. Of course, I was arrested. They closed the one down in the city. But when I got over to the district court where the coffee shop is, I was arrested over there. What happened over there, I was sitting in the coffee shop, reading a paper. First time a black had ever tried to enter into the coffee shop. You could stand at the door and order what you wanted and somebody would bring it to you. But you could not go in and sit down and eat like white folks could. So that day when I walked into the coffee shop over in district court, the white guy who was blind, it was a black lady, and I guess I could understand her. It was her job to tell the white man that I was there, that I had bought a paper and a Hershey bar candy, and I was sitting at one of the tables eating it. So when I walked in, the coffee shop was full. He waited on me. She whispered and she told him that I was black. He said, if there's any colored people in here sitting to the table, he said, I would have to ask you to leave. I didn't answer. So he buzzed, had these little buzzers, he buzzed for the deputies. The deputies came in. And he told the owner, the proprietor at that time, he said, you would have to ask her to leave in my presence. The proprietor told me, he said, I told you colored people ain't allowed to eat in here, you would have to leave. I said, and at this time the halls was full of white feet people.
You were by yourself?
I was by myself each time. I was by myself. Each time. And I was booked and I was charged. I think my bond then was about $10,000.
What would the deputies, what would they say to you when they would take you to jail?
Some of them would tell you, you better be glad that I didn't come at you because, okay, when I was accused of cutting Wingate White the day over at the city park when he pushed on my daughter, and I think she was about 4 or 5 years old at the time, they says that you better be glad that it was not I who came to arrest y'all at that time, because if it was, Gilbert would have picked you up. And I told him, I said, yeah, I'll tell you one damn thing. You know Ravenhorse is riding too. He said, you's a smart nigger. And I said, you's a smart hunky. And I told him, I said, if you pull that gun off of you, I said, I'll fight you like a natural man. And at that time, I know I could and still can do it. And I would have done it. He said, you's a smart-ass nigger. I said, you's a smart-ass hunky. I said, that's y'all problem. I said, y'all go around here and misuse and abuse. I said, but where I left off at on the other side. What was I saying? Cause
you were saying that you were. I was asking you who was
behind me at that time. Let me tell you, grassroots people who, especially like out in Ward 1, District 3. And what hurt you so bad, these were the people who got out and demonstrated and marched with me, of course, along with Reverend Jones, who was, as I say, came to Baton Rouge, and he woke black people up at that time, because, as you know, the demonstrations across the nations was moving everywhere, and Baton Rouge still didn't get on the ball like they really should, compared to your states like Mississippi, Georgia, and Alabama. And as you know, I did work a while up in Mississippi with Medgar Evers, who was killed during the movement. But I'll get to that later on. People like Miss Laurie Harrison, Willie Lee Harrison, or Bernice Johnson, some old people who I knew, who was with me with anything that I wanted to do. That's where I really got my support from. As far as the black ministers, there was one minister, it was Reverend Anderson, back on 46th Street. But most of them, you would ask about having a meeting or a rally or something. They said they were afraid that their churches or something. Of course, white folks was really burning churches or wherever, you know, black folks was assembled at that time to disencourage you. But yet the Klansmen could go from state to state and parish to parish or town to town and like that process, and wasn't anything done. And of course they got all the support that they could get. But as far as your black business people, they would finance you. But as far as coming out and taking an active part or getting active, like again, like I said, in your other states or parishes and things. For instance, just like I worked a while over in Plaquemine with Dr. Tyson, who was very dynamic over there, who really had a hard time over there too. I didn't have that kind of support as far as professional people, other than, again, like I said, Representative Joe Delbert, who was councilman at that time. And of course, Attorney Jones was the attorney for the NAACP.
What was some of the black business? You say some of the black businesses would support you?
Money-wise, for instance, just like we had bonds or fines to pay. And another person who I would like to talk about is Reverend J.K. Haynes, who experienced some of the same experience that I had here in Baton Rouge. He had it up in Shreveport, I think he told me, in the late 20s and the early 30s, or the early 30s or something, or the early 40s or one. But he used to talk to me all the time, told me about the experience he had being knocked in the head because he was in support of black teachers at that time who really had it, you know. And he would come out openly, but the rest of your professional people would not come out and say march or demonstrate or picket. And I really couldn't understand it. And went across the country that your professional people was the ones who really came out and supported you. You know, money is good, but faces mean a whole lot too.
Did you ever as time passed, moved from the mid-60s to the early 70s, some of these people, did you come closer together at this time? Some of the people who support you may have needed in the past, did you ever get together as time went along?
The more I demonstrate, the more some of those people at that time, they began to, with white folks, very unique, found out that they were supporting the NAACP or some civil rights group. What white folks was doing at that time, they would call these people in and put them on your biracial committee to deal with your racial issues. Then these people start not helping you, they start not backing you. And the most strangest thing that you could see, if you go to one of those meetings and see how these black folks you think was really black at that time, because a white man had named him on one of his biracial committee meetings, would take a U-turn around from what you knew what he was supposed to have been about, and then you have to question that too. Saying, is he here for just opportunities, or he's here to help people? Being placed on these biracial committees and all these other racial committees that they had, putting predominantly professional black people on them, trying to ease the race riots, as they would put them, and I didn't call them that. White folks was the ones who would incite the riot, because just like I told them, I got arrested quite a bit for fighting, because civil rights workers, white folks thought at that time, was not supposed to have been taught not to fight back, that you're supposed to take all this punishment, you're supposed to let them hit you, you're supposed to let them kick you, you're supposed to let them spit on you.
You did not believe totally in Dr. King's philosophy?
I believed in him in the religious part, but I did not believe in the nonviolence part. Because I believed in Malcolm X. I believed an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. I believe if I turn my left cheek, I'm going to turn around and you're going to slap me on the right. Either you was going to die or I was going to die.
Now, we won't have an hour on this tape. You can easily talk 3 hours, but
I could.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about, you brought up the so-called race riots, and a person that's still close to you is Jerry Johnson, and he was arrested for inciting a riot back then, and also Emmett Douglas. And if you ask someone my age or anyone, name some prominent blacks or anyone that was, has done a lot for race relations for black people in Baton Rouge over the last 20, 30 years, you would automatically think of people like Emmett Douglas, people, you hear people call A.Z. Young, and others, Murphy Bell. And I've noticed you haven't mentioned any of these people's names so far, because I want to make sure I word this right. Was that because at the time you're talking about now, you were in the pits? I mean,
I was down in the pits of it. Let me say, these people was active because they want a salary. I'm talking about we was out here because we was out here working. I wanted to see a change, and it was no pay, no nothing. I feel that at that time, if you had an attorney, you couldn't say he was involved in the civil rights movement because he was a paid attorney. He was there because I felt at any time at that time, and black lawyers at that time and didn't have good business, you can get any lawyer to fight a civil rights case because that's where the money was as far as black lawyers at that time. But I'm talking people who was down in the nitty-gritty, like your Jerry Johnsons, like the Laura Harrisons, or like your Reverend Arthur Jokes. I'm talking about people who hit the streets. I'm talking about like A.Z. Young. I'm talking about the Deacons of Defense who come to people's rescue when they were marching from Burgaloosa to Baton Rouge. I'm talking about your Dr. Tysons who, when we demonstrated over in Plaquemine when the caliproms was put to us, this is what I'm talking about. These are the people who have been and gone unnoticed. I'm not talking about the people who would get on these committees and everybody recommend as being the black leaders. You cannot leave me sitting around the table with a group of white people and they telling you what to come back and tell me. Because like When we was demonstrating and opening up the lunch counters at that time, and I didn't know it, Reverend Jemison and Raymond Scott had gone down and met with some of the business people, and at that time, blacks had certain days to come into Crest and Woolworth and McCurry's and the rest of the lunch counters on certain days to run a test. And when we went in there after the demonstrations from Southern University, they called Reverend Jemison and Raymond Scott, and they wanted a biracial committee, and that was supposed to cool attention down among blacks at that time. When I went back the next time to walk into Crest, they told me to call my leader. I told them Reverend Arthur Joggs was my leader. I said, "Is that to call your minister?" I said, "What are you talking about, Reverend Joggs?" He says, "No, I'm talking about Reverend Jemison." I said, "You people." I said, "What you mean by you people is not supposed to be here today. I didn't know that we had certain days to eat. You have certain days to eat." I said, "Who are you talking about?" He said, "Call Reverend Jemison." I said, "Well, I'm going to sit here." I said, "Because Reverend Jemison do not lead me. I lead myself." I say, "Raymond Scott do not lead me. I lead myself." Each restaurant who had a cafeteria on 3rd Street in those days, each one we went in that day, told us to call our leader. It came, and come to find out to my surprising, the people who they were had testing those lunch counters at that time was kids and people from Southern University and Park Vincent, not Park Vincent, Southern Heights, your upper class blacks. When you got your everyday life, or I said your ghetto people as they call us in those days, in your demonstrations, picketing, when your walk-ins, your pray-ins, your set-ins, your cry-ins, your eat-ins, and it was we just went to no ends. But yet, when it was in the process of integrating the lunch counters, this is when these people come aboard and had certain people to come in and test it. I took about 50 people down, and we went to each restaurant, used each bathroom on 3rd Street, and this is what opened up your lunch counters downtown.
I noticed you mentioned that you said black leaders, but during the 60s and the early part of the 70s, you were an activist, probably labeled militant by the media, and probably even a lot of black people.
I was.
And when you first decided to run for political office, what was your feeling? What was the feedback to you from? Well, we can imagine what the media thought about it, but from your own people.
My own people thought that it was something that I should have done a long time ago. They knew I had represented them, trying to bring freedom, equality, and justice to them. They knew that the time had come for blacks at that time, and I should have ran 4 years prior when all the money was plentiful, and I really could have done something for this district back here. They knew it was time for me to move on. And as you know, since I've been in some more demonstrations since I've been elected, I have done some picketing since I've been elected. And I just want to make it clear, as long as I live, and I feel that there is injustice done, because number one, I don't look at myself as a public official. I look at myself as a public servant. And when you're serving to people, whatever the needs are, whatever the cry is, this is where I am.
Speaking as a public servant, but I'm pretty sure a lot of
white folks, even downtown, this is what you want to know, the administration downtown when I first was elected.
Well, I was going to get to that, but some of the people in your district, they probably look at you as part of the system. I'm talking about something like you mentioned earlier, younger blacks and so forth. How does it make you feel when someone says, you know, for so many years you fought from the outside, and though you're still demonstrating while you're a member of the council, but you're doing a lot of things on the inside.
Mm-hmm.
And when people come to you with so many problems and things, and it's impossible probably to help everybody with everything, how do you feel when you see some of your same words thrown back at you sometimes? Like someone tell you, I know you can do it, y'all can do anything you want down there, you know, those type of things.
Very seldom. Somebody, probably about 3 or 4 people, I guess I've been lucky, told me this. Now you catch your younger jet sets who really don't know. Most of them, if they have a problem, if they come here and say, Miss George, said my mama, daddy, or whatever, told me about the sacrifice that you have made in the past. And they say, if it's any way possible that you can help me, they say that you would. And God knows that's the truth, I will. So it is their parents who was young women and men at that time know what I did. And most of them have instilled this in their children's minds. And you'll be surprised they got some kids 14, 15 years old now who can tell me of some of the things that I've done that their parents have passed on to them. So it's beginning to become something like history. And you know, it's a shame when blacks make progress like we did in the 60s that they have been left out of history books. So blacks, kids and the young kids that are coming up now would know that black people at that time just wasn't on welfare and food stamps and just sitting around and not making some type of contribution to society for black people.
Did you have to make any adjustments when you was elected to the council?
Yes, we've had several just before the Sunshine Law passed, before I was inaugurated. I met with the new councilmen at that time who...
you were the first woman also.
Right, first one. Right. And they said, well, we met at our office, and he said, well, Miss George said, everybody, when passed around, told what they had done, and come to my time, and the guy who was Mayor Pro Tem then, who was George Dabb, says, well, Miss George, we know what you're about. He said, you're elected now. He said that there's certain things that you were doing during the march that you might not be able to do now. So let me tell you something, I was black before I ever thought about being elected. And whatever I think is wrong, I'm going to march, I'm going to scream, I'm going to holler, and I can fight, and we'll fight. I said, you can check my record. Each time I went to jail, it was for aggravated battery on white folks. And so when I got downtown, they said that they thought they really was going to have problems out of me because I was a black militant, which is good because they would have if they had a fool with me and still will. I said, as long as you respected me and giving me the same thing that you're giving the white folks, you have no fight with me. I said, but when you start electing me and my people that I'm down here representing, I said, you think I was militant then, but you ain't seen nothing yet.
After, with your long...
And they was really afraid, because they know I do file suits, and I will file suits now.
Your long experience in the movement and your political experience and being on the inside of watching the decisions made, reading the various reports of what's supposed to be this and that and the other. What do you think are the major problems facing black people in Baton Rouge?
The major problem, and especially you're talking about your young people, your middle-aged people, or your older people? Just
in general.
I'll tell you what has happened.
Break it down if you feel it.
Okay, let me tell you about your older people. I say from 35 to 45. They know what the struggle was at that time. They know what black folks went through with to try to bring some equalities and justice for all black people. And when you take your age group from 35 to 20, they know a little or something about it. They know a little bit because when they were children coming up, the parents who was just a little bit older, and these things was happening during the 60s, they would see the marches on TV, they would see the demonstrations on TV, and they would know. But you catch your younger parents, and the most hurting thing is now that your young black women and men is not concerned about the future for tomorrow. I feel that, and it hurts me when I see one generation to the other one is passed on from welfare to food stamps. It hurt me twice as bad when I see how drugs is filtrating into our community. And it hurts me much more worse when I can sit back and think, when I could see white men coming in and soliciting black women. And when you see all of these multicolored kids, especially in your low-end project houses, when they had these social workers coming out from the welfare office, I'm talking about men, coming out and exploiting these young black women, and some of them have kids for them.
Talking about recently?
Well, like in your 60s and 50s, and you don't find that now too much. Because since the integration law has passed, you don't see them slipping in the hiding and dipping in the dodging. But I'm very concerned about the young generation. I'm very concerned. Look like we've lost them. I think what has happened after the 60s and after the demonstrations was at rest, and black folks thought they had what they wanted, but they didn't, because at that time what white folks was doing is had a solution to the problem at that time, because what they did, they put a pacifier in our mouth to pacify us, and we thought we had it made. But now the federal government and the white folks have come along and weaned us off of that pacifying. We had gotten so used to a bottle. You'd be trained from a pacifier to a bottle to a pacifier. And we can't deal with it. We're so used to somebody giving us something. Again, old people like my mama, when we was coming, would instill in us mind, work for what you want. The opportunity is there. But the way black folks was more united in the 50s, in the 60s, than they are today. And again, when all the jobs and all of your theaters and all of your fine restaurants started opening up to blacks, we forgot about the black brothers and sisters that we left back there in the ghettos. Plenty of times when we climb the ladder of success, we forget to come back and grab one of our brothers and sisters.
I'd like to ask you that earlier. What do you feel is the reason for that? I know you were speaking of some incidents in the early 60s and possibly even the late 50s, and you mentioned that we even went to Delpits or Bernards, and this is 15 to 20 years later, and I guess Mr. Delpit still is the only black with a long-running successful restaurant. I mean, there are others, small cafes, but using that as an example, why haven't with all the laws and change in the Constitution, the integration of the schools, more black people with college degrees, black people working at the plants with good income, not probably proportionate as to white, but compared to 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. Why haven't we advanced financially and economically like take Chinese, Japanese, like you mentioned earlier, they all come in.
What has happened, I think, again, during the 50s and 60s, and black folks who did get the lucky breaks, and again, I said that white folks put past, they lead us to believe that we had everything on equal basis as whites, and this is not so. Number one, I think what has happened with that, where is it that a white person could get a loan, and I've known some white folks who have filed bankruptcies today and open a new business tomorrow. And believe it or not, I've done some research, I've been involved, and I've tried it out, and I've tested it. Even in your banks, they would let so many blacks, because of course you say black, they would say blacks at risk when it comes to borrowing money. But white folks is the only things that used to go bankruptcy. Black people just learned out about going bankruptcy. It have not been easy, even for your small business loan, for black people to get those loans, and don't let nobody fool you. There have been problems for black people as far as in business, because let's face the fact. Number one, white folks don't want you on the same equal basis as they are, because they know they can't cope with a black person. And as long as white folks is controlling the monies, and it's very sad that you have some black businessmen who can open up banks. You have some black businessmen who can do certain things, but for some reason, to me, it looks as if those black folks are afraid, number one, to invest. You see. So again, it has been a shade over us. But white folks say, well, let's keep these black people quiet. Let's give them a little something. And this is what has happened. But as far as actually having the freedom to go into these banks and just to borrow money because you are Mr. So-and-so, that has never happened to us.
As a black woman, if a young black woman would come to you today and say, Miss George, I followed your career and I want to be active. I want to get in politics. I want to do this in business. I want to do a great number of things. And I respect you. And could you give me some advice? What would you tell her?
Number one, I would have to sit down. Of course, if she followed me along down through the years, or she heard something about me long down through the years, I don't think I would have too much explaining to do. I would take her, see what her goals are, see what her future is, and see what she just really wants to do. And I would work to the bitter end to help her.
As I was saying that being a council person, well known, how has that and there's so much, especially the black magazines such as Ebony and other magazines, that once the black woman start, rising in status financially or her career, black men become jealous and have a difficult time dealing with the black woman. Have you found that to be true? That that some of your biggest problems is dealing with some black men?
Your biggest problem is dealing with males.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, as you know, black women to a certain extent have always been free. And I don't feel that I'm free until all the black men have been freed. They will tell you, are you a woman? Are you going to be a man? Are you going to make decisions? Or what you going to do? And as you know, black women have always been the head of their household. And especially in your poor areas, and especially in your black families. It have always been the black woman, and I'm sure you don't want to hear me say this, but I have to say it. It have always been the black woman who have pushed black men to the ladder of success. Black women, and the reason why I think they can be independent more than a man can. And if you've noticed, you find more women who probably could get married as not, and men has a tendency to get married quicker than women because they're not used to being independent as much as to make certain decisions on their own. It have always been the black woman who pushed her black husband or her black man along the way and guide him. She have always been there to give him strength. You understand what I'm saying? When it has been different. It's been different. A black woman is not used to the support of a white woman would have, because the certain experience that black women have had as far as having to get out and work, like my mother had to do from sun up to sundown, even though she did have a husband for a while. She put in more hours than he did. Okay, well, white women's not used to making certain types of decisions. I don't think white women cannot cope with life because they're not strong like black women.
Okay, now with the ERA movement and so forth. Notice on the national level and even on state and local level, although there are black women involved in the movement. I know notice it's predominantly white females, and also that it is said that the black male has to compete with the white male, and now the white male and female for jobs in certain areas. Do you see yourself as a comrade with the white female in just in the respect of the equal rights amendment, the feminist movement, or whatever term you would want to use it, or do you see yourself differently being a black woman, or do you just see yourself as a woman in that respect?
I see myself being different as a black woman, because number one, a white woman has always had her freedom. The little freedom that I got, I had to get out and fight for it, and I had to fight the white man and the white society to get it. So quite naturally, we are different, and I think it's different. White women have always had it easy. Again, where black women used to still have to, some of them, again, is the backbone of their family.
Do you think, I think Shirley Chisholm was asked one time, was criticized by some that's in New York where she was from. She did not back Bella Abzug for whatever office she was running for. She backed another candidate. The reason she did it, she said, when the time she ran for president, they didn't back her. Do you feel the same that you are basically a black woman, and that makes you, outside of physically being a woman, you are different from, say, a white female? And recently, I think you've been the only female elected by the people
That's right.
to council, but in the recent past, there was another female on the council.
She was appointed to fill out her husband's expired time who had passed.
Did you see any difference in the treatment? I mean, as you've been elected by the people, do the male councilmen treat? Would you say there's any difference in the treatment because you're a female?
Let me say this. White men have always respected the black woman, even if it had to be behind closed doors. When I first got on the council, just like I said, I think they were, I'm sure they really accepted me really for what I was, and at that time they said it was a black militant, I was black.